Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something a bit different. We're going to skip the usual prepared remarks from the Lemonade Q3 2025 earnings call and jump straight into the Q&A.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's where you really hear what's on the minds of, the analysts and the retail investors who follow this company closely. It's less polish, more pointed questions.
Right. And our mission here isn't just to rehash the numbers. We want to dig into how this AI first approach they talk about actually translates into real business advantages like pricing power, sustainable growth, that kind of stuff.
We're looking for the structural edge. How does their model let them grow the top line but also hit those profitability targets they've set?
And honestly, the most fascinating thing that jumped out right away wasn't just efficiency for efficiency's sake. It was this idea, this really counterintuitive concept that maybe, just maybe, the lowest possible loss ratio isn't always their ultimate goal.
Yeah, that one definitely makes you pause. Dollars over percentages, they kept saying. But before we get lost in that, we probably need to understand the engine behind that flexibility. It really started with a question about their core tech platform. A retail investor asked about local.
Okay, local. Right. They described it as this, next gen, LLM first, no code builder for insurance products. That sounds like a mouthful. What does it actually do?
Basically, it lets them create new insurance offerings or tweak existing ones incredibly fast. They claimed, things that used to take weeks of engineering time can now potentially happen in, like, hours.
Hours instead of weeks. That's a huge difference.
It is. And the key thing is the operating leverage. Think about it. Usually, building or changing an insurance product means defining coverages, dealing with state filings, setting all the parameters. That takes engineers writing and deploying code.
Okay, so it's a bottleneck.
A huge one. But with local, the idea is that the product managers and the actuaries, the people who actually understand the insurance side, can configure, design, test, and even launch products through an interface. No coding required, apparently.
So you take the engineers out of that loop for day-to-day product stuff.
Pretty much. It turns that product cycle from this, variable, slow, engineer-dependent process into something much more scalable run by the business folks themselves. That speed is crucial for iterating quickly and expanding.
And you'd expect that kind of structural advantage to show up somewhere on the financials, right? On the P&L, Jason Helfstein from Oppenheimer asked exactly that. Where's the AI impact?
And the answer was pretty blunt. Pretty much every line.
Okay, bold claim. Did they back it up?
They did give some specifics. Over the last 3 years, they said their gross profit, so premiums minus losses and reinsurance costs, is up something like tenfold.
Tenfold, wow.
Yeah. And during that same period, their total headcount, the number of employees, has apparently stayed flat, or maybe even declined slightly.
Okay, that is operating leverage. Pure and simple. More output, same or fewer inputs.
Exactly. They also touched on customer acquisition. Apparently, about 90% of their marketing spend is guided by AI now, using something like 50 different machine learning models to figure out where to spend money based on LTV to CAC predictions.
So AI is finding the customers and AI is helping build the products. What about handling the claims? That seems like a big cost center for insurance.
Huge. And that led to maybe the most startling metric they shared. It was about LAE, loss adjustment expense.
Right. LAE, that's basically the cost of handling a claim, like the administrative overhead, investigations, paying adjusters, expressed as a percentage of the premiums, right?
You got it. And it's a standard industry benchmark. Shai Weininger, one of the founders, pointed out that big, established carriers often run around 9% LAE.
Okay, 9% is the benchmark. Where's Lemonade?
Well, their current average across all products is 7%, which is already impressive, especially since they're smaller. Usually you need scale for that efficiency.
So better than average already.
But that's not even the main story. The trend is what's kind of nuts. In just the past 3 years, they claim they've cut their LAE ratio in half.
Halved it from what, like 14% down to 7%?
Something like that.
Yeah.
And get this. While they were having the cost per claim, the actual volume of claims they handled grew 2.5 times.
Wait, so cost per claim plummeted while the number of claims exploded?
And the number of human claims adjusters actually went down.
Okay, that doesn't happen without some serious automation and AI taking over core processes. That's a fundamental shift.
It really is. And they were careful to address the customer side, too. They insisted that AI isn't the main driver of complaints. They said most complaints are still about, human errors or delays, maybe needing a human to review something the AI flagged.
So the goal is to make the AI review better, turn that human review cost, which is variable, into a fixed AI cost.
That seems to be the idea, which kind of leads into how they see themselves. They were asked to rate their AI capabilities.
Ah, okay. How do they score themselves?
Well, compared to the rest of the insurance industry today, they gave themselves a pretty confident, like, 10 out of 10.
Okay, top marks versus peers.
But then the question flipped. How do they rate themselves against the potential of future AI, like artificial general intelligence or AGI?
Yeah.
There, they gave themselves a 1 out of 10.
Huh. Okay, so we're the best there is right now, but we know we've barely scratched the surface of what's possible.
Exactly that. It's this dual view, leading the pack in narrow AI applications today, but seeing this vast, wide-open future for improvement as AI gets smarter.
That makes sense. And that potential probably fuels their growth ambitions, right?
Hmm.
Which brings us nicely to the car insurance segment and this whole idea of cross-selling. Thomas McJohn-Griffith asked about that.
Yeah, he asked about the growth from what they call solace customers.
Costless, meaning customer acquisition cost of zero. How does that work?
It's about cross-selling. He said about half, 50%, plus or minus, of their new car insurance customers are already Lemonade customers. People who started with renters or home insurance.
Right. Okay, so they already paid to acquire that customer once for the first policy. When they add car insurance later, the specific cost to acquire them for that car policy is basically zero.
Right. It's CAC-less. But they actually went a step further and kind of hinted at sometimes negative CAC.
Negative cost. How can acquiring a customer make you money?
Because these existing customers who add a second policy aren't just free to acquire for that second product. They apparently perform way better across the board. They have better loss patterns, they stick around longer, higher retention.
Ah, okay. So they're already vetted, they know the system, there may be just better risks overall.
Seems like it. So adding that free car policy actually makes a whole customer relationship even more profitable, potentially offsetting more than just the car acquisition cost, maybe even improving the economics of the original renter's policy, hence negative CAC conceptually.
Got it. That bundling strategy feels pretty powerful. And does that tie into how they're thinking about the future, like self-driving cars?
Definitely. Someone asked about full self-driving, FSD. And while, nobody knows the exact timeline for widespread autonomy,
Right, it's still pretty uncertain.
the shift itself kind of plays right into Lemonade's hands. They're built on tech, usage-based pricing, real-time data. They don't have clunky old legacy systems to worry about.
And they have that Tesla integration, right?
Exactly. They mentioned that direct API connection. It lets them pull much richer data directly from the car than you'd get from just a phone app or one of those plug-in dongles.
Like what kind of data?
Things like, is the seatbelt actually being used?
Yeah.
More accurate start and end points for trips? Really granular stuff.
Which helps them price risk better today.
Right. Sharpens their underwriting right now. But just as importantly, it positions them to learn directly from how these advanced driver assist systems, and eventually FSD, actually perform in the real world over time. They can see the data, see how risk changes.
So they're building the data set for the future of car insurance, basically. How big do they expect car to get? Luke Nelson asked about that mix.
Yeah. Right now, car is about 15%, 15% of their total in-force premium, or IFP.
Okay, still relatively smallish.
But the long-term vision is huge. They project car could be around 40% of their business when or if the company reaches $10 billion in total premium. So a massive growth engine for them.
40%. Okay, that's a big target. And just quickly before we dive into the philosophy shift, any news on pet insurance? Andrew Anderson asked about stability there.
Yeah, they said pet loss ratios are stable, predictable, pretty much what you want. The partnership with Chewy is apparently driving almost 5% of that business now.
Okay.
And they made a point about speed again, saying they got to their current market position in pet in maybe 4 or 5 years, while the established pet-only insurers took more like 10 or 12 years to reach a similar scale.
So another plug for the platform's speed-to-market advantage.
Seems like it.
All right, let's shift gears. This is the part that really caught my ear, the financial philosophy. Katie Sakis and Charlie were asking about that 73% gross loss ratio target they used to talk about. And this is where things got weird, in a good way. This dollars over percentages idea.
Yeah, this is definitely the core strategic shift, I think. Management was really emphatic. They said the number one thing they're trying to maximize is absolute gross profit dollars. Not the loss ratio percentage, not the gross margin percentage.
Okay, hold on. That sounds risky. Like, standard finance says you watch your margins carefully. Lowering margins to chase volume can be dangerous, right? Aren't
Yeah,
you sacrificing quality or stability?
that's the traditional view, absolutely.
Yeah.
But their argument is different. It hinges on the idea that insurance is super price sensitive or price elastic.
Meaning small price changes have a big impact on whether people buy or stay.
Exactly. And because they believe their AI gives them this structural cost advantage, lower LAE, lower operating costs, they can afford to pass some of that saving on to customers through lower prices. And here's the kicker. They believe that a small percentage decrease in price can lead to an outsized increase in customer conversion and retention and cross-selling opportunities.
So let's say dropping the price pushes their loss ratio up a few points, from maybe 70% to 75%. That makes the percentage margin thinner.
Right.
But if that price cut brings in, say, way more customers or keeps way more customers from leaving, and those customers buy multiple products and have good LTV, the total number of profit dollars generated ends up being much higher.
That's precisely the trade-off they're describing. And they said they'd make that trade 10 times out of 10. The percentage margin becomes just an input, a tool.
So that 73% loss ratio target they used to talk about isn't a hard ceiling anymore.
Not really. They described it more as a lever, something they adjust based on the market, the product, the region, the competitive landscape, all to maximize those total gross profit dollars.
That's a fundamentally different way to steer the ship compared to traditional insurers. Daniel Schreiber, the CEO, gave a pretty extreme example, right? Using those CAC-less customers.
Yeah, he did. He basically said, look, for these customers who cost almost nothing to acquire or service the cross-sell ones, they could theoretically lower prices so much that they'd still be profitable, even if the loss ratio for that specific segment hit, say, 90%.
90% loss ratio, because the other costs, acquisition and servicing, are virtually zero for that customer.
Exactly. So even a razor-thin gross margin on the premium still translates directly into positive profit dollars very efficiently for that segment.
So the focus isn't one single target number anymore. It's like micro-optimization everywhere by product, campaign, state.
That's the picture they painted,
Yeah.
fine-tuning across the board. But, and this is crucial, they drew one very firm line in the sand.
Which was?
Profitability. The target date for achieving positive adjusted EBITDA Q4 2026 is locked in. No change there.
Yeah.
That's non-negotiable.
Okay, so the flexibility is on the internal operating metrics like loss ratio and gross margin, using them as tools. But the bottom line profitability timeline itself isn't flexible.
Correct. The destination is fixed, but they're giving themselves more flexibility on exactly how they navigate the ship to get there.
That makes sense. And speaking of navigating differently in different places, Zachary Gunn asked about Europe. That's like a real bright spot.
Oh, absolutely. Europe's performance sounded spectacular, like
Yeah.
170% growth in Q3, customer base doubling year over year. Just really strong numbers.
What's driving that? Is it just a newer market for them?
Partly, maybe. But the key difference they highlighted was regulatory speed.
How so?
Apparently, unlike in the U.S., where getting price changes approved can be a slow, state-by-state bureaucratic process.
Yeah, insurance regulation in the U.S. is famously complex.
In Europe, they have significantly more freedom to adjust prices dynamically. Almost instantly, if their AI spots that their pricing is off somewhere, they can course correct on the fly.
Ah, so that dynamic pricing model they want to run has fewer roadblocks in Europe.
Seems like it. And that speed translates directly to better results. They mentioned the European business's loss ratios currently running about 30 points better than the U.S. business was when it was at a similar size or stage of development.
30 points better. That suggests the AI is learning fast, and they can deploy those learnings much more quickly over there.
Yeah, quicker feedback loops, less friction in implementing changes. It really showcases the potential of their model when regulatory constraints are looser.
Which brings us back to the U.S. Katie Sakis pointed out that their Q4 guidance seemed a bit conservative, predicting maybe 29% to 30% growth, even though Q3 IFP looks strong. Why the caution?
It comes down to this clean the book exercise, mainly in the home insurance segment. They're still actively pruning, getting rid of customers or policies in certain areas that don't meet their current risk appetite.
So they're deliberately slowing down some top-line growth in specific spots to improve the overall health and long-term profitability of the book.
Exactly. Sacrificing some short-term IFP growth for better quality business down the road.
But even while doing that pruning, they mentioned annual dollar retention, ADR, right?
Yeah.
How did that look?
Yeah, ADR actually increased again, sequentially, up to 85%, which is pretty strong. It suggests that while they're trimming some fat, they're holding on to their core desirable customers even better. Yeah. The ones they want to keep are sticking around more.
Okay, that makes the pruning strategy sound more effective. Lastly, just a quick check on the financial plumbing reinsurance. Any changes there? Charlie asked about that.
Yeah, there's a definite shift happening. They're becoming less reliant on reinsurance partners. Historically, they ceded or shared a large chunk of their premiums and losses, maybe around 55% under older deals.
Okay.
Now they're moving towards a model where by mid-2026, they only plan to cede about 20% of their business.
That's a big drop. From 55% down to 20%. What does that signal?
It signals confidence. They believe their AI underwriting is getting good enough that they're comfortable keeping more of the risk and the potential profit on their own books.
And for Q4 2025 specifically.
The effective overall rate, considering the mix of old and new deals, will be around 40% ceded. They still earn a ceding commission, like a fee from reinsurers, on the portion they do share, typically in the mid-20% range. So ceding less means keeping more premium and potentially more underwriting profit internally. So wrapping it all up, this deep dive into just the Q&A really highlights a company that sees AI not just as a tool for, shaving off a few percentage points here and there. They see it as a fundamental structural advantage.
Yeah, it allows them to completely rethink the playbook, to stop chasing margin percentages as the be-all and end-all, and instead focus relentlessly on maximizing the total number of profit dollars coming in.
It's a different optimization game altogether.
So the final thought maybe for you, the listeners, this. If AI really does allow for this kind of instant, continuous pricing adjustment, like Lemonade seems to be achieving in Europe, and if the ultimate goal is maximizing absolute profit, not just margin percentage, what does that mean for the future?
Right. What happens to traditional insurance carriers stuck with older systems, slower processes, and maybe more rigid regulatory hurdles? How do they compete when speed, data, and this kind of aggressive price elasticity become the main weapons?
At what point does that structural advantage in technology and strategy become, well, truly unassailable market dominance? That feels like the big question Lemonade is trying to answer.